15. One thing I mentioned last week, I went back and looked at my notes. I think what I've got written in the notes is correct. This is where Saul was commanded to go utterly destroy the Amalekites. The Lord was taking vengeance, as he had promised, on the Amalekites for how they had treated the Israelites as they came out of Egypt. And so he's finally executing judgment on them, and he gives that mission to Saul. And one of the things that Saul does before he attacks the Amalekites is to warn the Kenites. And the Kenites, I think in my discussion I said they were descendants of Cain. And I shouldn't have said that because the descendants of Cain all got wiped out in the flood. But what I put in the notes, and I think that's correct, scholars think that the Kenites and the name Cain are related. And so the notes I gave you correct. It was what I was rambling on about. I get all excited when I teach. So I wanted to make that clear before we went any further. Any questions before we dive in? We had gotten to the end of verse 9 of chapter 15, where he had warned the Kenites. No, I'd gotten further than that, got down past verse 16. This is after God had told Samuel, Saul's out. I'm rejecting him as king. And so Samuel goes to meet Saul down at Gilgal. And old Saul, he says, I did what you told me to do. I did what the Lord told me to do. And Samuel said, whoa, I hear the voice of sheep and the voice of oxen. I know it says the bleating or the lowing, but the actual word is the voice, the sounds that they make. And so then Saul just keeps on. And finally, I think basically what Samuel says is, Saul, shut up. He says, be quiet in verse 16. And so Saul says, well, speak on. And that's where we pick up in verse 17 tonight. And so let me get up there. So Samuel said, when you were little in your own eyes, were you not head of the tribes of Israel? And did not the Lord anoint you king over Israel? There was a time when Saul thought he was pretty insignificant, that he wasn't important enough. He was from a small tribe. He was insignificant. And so he could not see how he could be the first king of Israel. And so you were little in your own eyes. And then the Lord made him head of all the tribes of Israel. And the Lord's the one who anointed you king over Israel. Now the Lord sent you on a mission and said, go and utterly destroy the sinners, the Amalekites. And that's kind of interesting that he calls the Amalekites sinners. That's just kind of an unusual thing to call these foreigners, but he calls them sinners. We think of sinners who transgress God's law. They don't go by God's law, but maybe there's some laws that God expects all humankind to obey. And so he calls them sinners, and fight against them until they are consumed. Why then did you not obey the voice? Why did you not hear Shema? Why did you not hear the voice of the Lord? And remember, I mentioned last week, you have to notice the use of the word Shema in this whole chapter, where it means to hear, to obey, to gather together. Shema has a lot of uses, but it's very important in this account of what Saul did and how Samuel. I love seeing hawks. As I drive to church, a lot of times I'll see the hawks, and I love to see them. And every once in a while, you are graced with seeing them swoop down for a mouse or something. And that's the picture that Samuel's painting. Why did you swoop down on the spoil and do evil in the sight or in the eyes of the Lord? Why did you do it, Saul? Why did you do what you did? Again, I'm not looking at my notes, so please go back and read the notes. I probably leave a bunch of stuff out. And Saul said to Samuel, but I have obeyed, I have heard, I have Shema, I have heard the voice of the Lord and gone. Sometimes I put these words in there because they fascinate me. Halach means to walk. Means to walk. But it can mean to go, it can mean to come. Or he went. And gone on the mission on which the Lord sent me, and brought back Agag, king of Amalek. I don't see how Saul says this with a straight face. I have utterly destroyed the Amalekites. We've probably had this, for those of us who have raised children, have had this conversation with their children. I told you to clean your room. Well, I did. And then you lift up the bed and all the stuff is under the bed. I shouldn't tell certain things, should I? Misty was about every 3 months, Gail would have to go in and clean Misty's room. I don't know where Misty got all this stuff, but Gail would have 4 or 5 big black trash bags full of stuff. Did you clean your room? Yeah. Now, how could you get 4 or 5 trash bags out of a child's room? But she would. About every 3 or 4 months, Gail would go in there and clean the house. And we never could figure out where all this stuff came from. Maybe she was a kleptomaniac, I don't know, but she had stuff and it'd go to the dump. Well, I look at this account, and Saul is acting like a child. I did what you told me to do. No, you didn't, Saul. No, you didn't. I have utterly destroyed the Amalekites. What does utterly destroy mean when it says karam? What does it mean? Everything. Even nursing babies you kill. And I know that's repulsive for us to even say it, but that's what God told him to do. And he says he did it. But do we ever do that? But it wasn't me. But the people, they forcibly, that can mean it, they seized, they took of the plunder, sheep and oxen, the best of the things, which should have been utterly destroyed. And that big, long underline, things which should have been utterly destroyed, Karim. Big rats back. Big rats, huh?
I said there was one cup left. It failed.
Kerem. Those things that were devoted to destruction, the people took the best of those things. But it's for a good reason, Samuel. They took it to sacrifice to the Lord. And I think we talked about this last week. He used this phrase, not my God, not our God, it's your God, Samuel. And it's interesting to read the commentaries on what that means. Now, I may not be the sharpest knife in the drawer, but I'm going to tell you. When it says the Lord your God, it certainly lessens the meaning of the Lord in Saul's sight. It's your God, Samuel, in Gilgal. So Samuel said, and here's the phrase that most of us have heard all our lives, that we need to do what the Lord tells us to do. Has the Lord his great delight in burnt offerings and sacrifices, as in obeying Shema, the voice of the Lord? Behold, to obey Shema is better than sacrifice, and to heed than the fat of rams. For rebellion is as the sin of witchcraft, and stubbornness. Any of us stubborn? And I believe that'd preach. And stubbornness is as iniquity and idolatry. Teraphim. Idolatry. That's an interesting term there. Teraphim. When I get to where I can point. Remember when Rachel and Leah accompanied Jacob away from their father's house, she stole the household gods. She stole the teraphim. That's what she took. And so here we see that term again translated as idolatry. That's what stubbornness is. Because you have rejected the word of the Lord, he also has rejected you from being king. Now, I think I mentioned this last week. God didn't, because of this one act, say, Saul, you're out. He had already warned him back in chapter 13. Chapter 13 and 14 and now 15, they all build up to God saying, you're no longer going to be king over Israel. I'm rejecting you. And I guess the reason I point that out is God's very merciful. God is very patient. Even with these guys disobeying him, he was very patient. Think of the judges. Gideon. The Lord was very patient with Gideon. First, he had to be very patient to get him to even move and act. And Samson, what a rogue he was. And yet, the Lord was very patient and merciful. Not saying he condoned everything that these men did, but he doesn't just fly off the handle and say, you're out. And maybe that's a good lesson for us. But he said, as this builds up, he finally says, this is it. I've had it. You've rejected obeying my word. I'm rejecting you as king over Israel. Then Saul said to Samuel, I have sinned. Well, they say confession's good for the soul, and Saul finally admits it. For I have transgressed the commandment. Anybody looking at my notes what pe means? Is it lip? Y'all gonna make me look it up. Mouth. I'm sorry.
Of the prophet's words, commandment of the Lord and the prophet's words, literally mouth.
Literally mouth. Again, it's one of those things that's kind of interesting that all through here, commandment has been the word or the voice, but now he says the mouth, getting right to the root of that. The mouth of, you have transgressed the mouth of the Lord and your words, because I feared the people. Saul was more afraid of what the people thought than what the Lord thought. Now that's an interesting, but the text is pretty clear about that he was more concerned about what people thought than what the Lord. Do we have that problem today? And the heads go, yes, we do. We are very concerned many times about what other people think. And that was Saul's problem. Because I feared the people and Shema obeyed their voice. Instead of obeying the voice of the Lord, I obeyed the voice of the people. Now, therefore, please pardon my sin and return with me that I may worship the Lord. So, this is kind of hard to put together. Where are they? Well, they're at Gilgal. You remember Saul went to Carmel and erected a monument to himself, and then he went to Gilgal. Samuel gets word, and he goes to find Saul in Gilgal. But evidently, what's been going on is a private conversation between Saul and Samuel to where the people couldn't hear him. So they probably walked maybe to the outside of the town of Gilgal and had this private conversation. Now return with me, go back with me into the camp that I may worship the Lord. But Samuel said to Saul, I will not return with you, for you have rejected the word of the Lord, and the Lord has rejected you from being king over Israel. And apparently, Samuel is gathering or inferring, okay, if the Lord has rejected you as king, I do not have to be your messenger anymore. The Lord has finished my mission with you because you're through. And so Samuel says, I'm not going to go back with you, Saul. If I go back with you, then people say, well, the Lord's prophet's still blessing the king. And Samuel perhaps sees a conflict of interest there. And as Samuel turned around to go away, to walk away, halach, Saul, and here's another thing. In the text, if you're using a New King James, probably a New American Standard, Saul should be in italics because it's not in the text. Now, again, reading commentaries, they'll say, well, who sees the edge of whose robe? Well, again, I don't think you have to be very brilliant not to catch the fact that within the context it has to be Saul grabbing Samuel's robe. I think it's pretty clear. But anyway, I tell you that because if you read a bunch of commentaries, you'll see that brought up. And I find it kind of humorous because there's no doubt that Saul seized the edge of Samuel's robe and tore it. And that's based upon the fact that Samuel said to him, "The Lord has torn the kingdom of Israel from you today." Back in chapter 13 is where, I believe it's verse 14, that the Lord has chosen a man after his own heart. That we already know in chapter 13 that Saul's going to be replaced. But here he uses something else. He says, he's torn the kingdom and given it to a neighbor of yours. Again, it's very interesting that it's going to be given to a man after God's own heart. It's a neighbor of yours who is better than you. Wow. I don't think we'd want to hear those words that the Lord is turning away from us and going to bless somebody because they're better than us. That would be very devastating. And also the strength of Israel, only time that appears, I believe, the strength of Israel will not lie nor relent. Used to they would say repent. Relent's a better word. God doesn't lie. He doesn't renege on his promises. Maybe that's a good way to put it. Now, does the Lord ever change his mind? Here's the answer. If he doesn't ever change his mind, let's quit praying. If the Lord never changes his mind, what's the point in prayer? Except to say thank you. But boy, we pray for the sick, don't we? Because we hope that the Lord will draw somebody out and heal them. However he does that providentially, but he doesn't renege on his promises. For he is not a man that he should relent like we do. Then he said, once again, I have sinned, yet kabod, honor me, give me glory. Literally, it means to put weight on something. And the noun is kabod, or glory, or I receive this honor. And literally, it's a weight, something heavy. I have sinned, yet honor me now, please, before the elders of my people. See, Saul is concerned about what the people think. And he's already admitted that he listened to people more than God. And now he wants Samuel to go with him before the elders of my people and for Israel, and return with me that I may worship the Lord. Who's God? Your God. I just find that fascinating. To me, Saul has hardened himself so much that he can't even really say what he needs to say. Now he says, I've sinned. But Samuel, come with me. We'll fool the people. We won't tell them what God's done. go with me so I can worship the Lord your God. And if you're with me as the priest, as the Lord's prophet, the people will still respect me as king. So Samuel turned back after Saul, and Saul worshiped the Lord. So Samuel was convinced to go back into the camp with Saul as king and let Saul worship the Lord there. Then Samuel said, "Bring Agag, king of the Amalekites, here to me." So Agag came to him cautiously. I find that very interesting. Agag's in chains. He's a prisoner, but he's coming before Samuel cautiously.
The English Standard says cheerfully. That's a brave dude, isn't it?
Yeah, he's real happy. I'm real happy. I know what's fixing to happen to me. You're going to cut my head off, and I'm just really happy. It comes from going back to the Word, and that's a possible translation. But for the life of me, I can't comprehend why they would translate it that way. I really can't. He's not going to be cheerful. He's a prisoner. Does he think they're going to let him go? Well, if he does, he's the dumbest king that ever lived. But anyway, I think I put a few things in there maybe about that. One translation said he came to him in shackles. He comes bound, which would make sense. But cheerfully, I don't think so. And Agag said, "Surely the bitterness of death is past." He's hopeful. He's in bondage, but he's hopeful. Hopeful that they'll spare his life. Now, you got to remember, back then, if a king was captured, it was pretty certain he'd be put to death. Something bad would happen to him. That's
Family too, right?
Do what?
His family too, right?
And his family. Now, evidently, if he had any family, they'd already killed them. Maybe. Because whatever they did, whatever the battles they had, they didn't destroy all the Amalekites. They're still going to come up in history. David's going to fight the Amalekites. So they're not done. They're going to be around for a while. Even David didn't wipe out all the Amalekites. They're still going to be around after him. So I don't know how to explain that, except they didn't do what they were supposed to do. But a king, back in those days, if you captured a king, he was going to be executed. Pretty positive. But Samuel said, "As your sword," boy, Samuel's quite a poet. Remember what he's already said about to obey is better than sacrifice? "As your sword has made women childless, so shall your mother be childless." Evidently, Agag was an only son at this time. "Your mother will be childless among women." And then I love this next one. "And Samuel hacked Agag in pieces before the Lord in Gilgal." Now, why I love that? I don't know. I just think, here's the prophet of the Lord. He's been a priest, a judge, and he hacks this captured king to pieces. I don't know about you, but it just fascinates me. He did what Saul was supposed to have done. Now, Saul was just supposed to kill him, but Samuel hacks him to pieces. I like murder mysteries. Now, I don't watch movies that show all the blood and guts and like Chainsaw Massacre and all that kind of foolishness, but I like good detective stories. And every once in a while, they have a case where somebody hacks people to death. Now, they don't show the pieces. I don't watch that kind of stuff. But, man, to have that in the Bible just fascinates me. Sometimes they tell stories that are, well, they're not telling stories like lies. They give accounts of actions that just are amazing. And I can't imagine Samuel being this rough and tough guy who takes a sword and hacks somebody to death. But he did. Comments? Yes, James.
Well, maybe Samuel was having a bad day. I mean, he comes and there's the flocks and there's the king and Saul and he get into this conversation about whether he did or didn't, and back and forth, and he gave the last thing to remind him of all the bad stuff, and he just went to work on it. It's like that first child in line for beating. First child gets the most beatings, then the rest of us get the line.
Well, if Samuel was having a bad day, I wouldn't want to cross his path.
The prophets were good hackers.
Huh?
The prophets were good hackers.
They were good hackers, yeah. Well, Elijah, I don't know if Elijah actually killed all those people, but sounds like he had a hand in it. Whew.
It was more to emphasize the point.
Do what?
It was more to emphasize the point.
I think you're exactly right.
I mean, he was the leader of this nation that had become so bad that it was devoted to destruction. He's the very head of it. He probably had some answer to do.
Now, I would say that as he did that, Saul's respect from the people dwindled. I would say that it was a good lesson, and because the people had to see it.
I'm just not gonna just kill him. I'm gonna hack him to pieces.
Yeah, I mean, it's very evident from the text. This wasn't just, I'm going to put him to death. There is a lot of violence involved in this death. Wow. Then Samuel went. And again, here's where the Hebrew fascinates me, because the word is walked, and he probably literally walked to Ramah, his home, and Saul went to his house at Gibeah of Saul. Less than 10 miles apart, they go to their respective homes, and Samuel went no more to see Saul until the day of his death. Nevertheless, Samuel mourned for Saul. He grieved for Saul. And the Lord regretted that he had made Saul king over Israel. Why did Samuel continue to mourn for Saul? Why did he?
They had probably become very close over time.
Okay, became close over time, Saul and Samuel. Samuel probably felt some responsibility because he's the one who anointed him in the first place. I think any of us who've baptized people have a certain closeness and concern for that child or adult that we've baptized. I think that's a normal closeness or bond. What else?
I think since Saul was a leader of Israel,
Okay, as the leader of Israel, and then the effect it would have on the rest of the people maybe falling away. If Saul did, naturally the people could. Anything else?
I have a question. Could you speak to that term regretted? Is that a case of self-limited foreknowledge when you made him king, or why would the Lord do something and then regret it later?
You know,
Maybe the flood too,
yeah, if you think through Scripture, he regretted that he'd made man for the flood when man has turned aside. During the Exodus, he was ready to wipe Israel out, and Moses intervened. He said, look, God, you're going to look crazy if you've delivered your people and now you give up on them. That's kind of the conversation that Moses had with the Lord. I don't know how to really explain it, but the word is regret.
it is okay. That's explanation of that.
Yeah. Now, it's not in terms of human regrets, and maybe that's where we have to wrestle with that. But I'll try to do a little more study on that and see if I can come up with another answer. So we're ready to start, I believe, chapter 16 next week. And the lesson sheet, except for the very last verses, are on the website if you want to go ahead and look at those. But I do put the lesson sheets on the church's website if you want to look at those. Thank you for being here. Thank you for your attention, and hope to see you Sunday. Thank you.